Morning, everyone. Got 10:02. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the August 5th meeting of the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee. My name is Jeremy Keene. I'm the City Public Works Director. We are continuing to meet virtually. You can join the meeting by clicking on either of these links here. And if you're calling in by phone, you can use *6 to mute and unmute yourself, *9 to raise and lower your hand. And Bella, would you mind taking roll for me?
Yeah, all right, let's start with Shane Stack. Sarah Cofield. Corey Aldridge.
Here.
Ellen Buchanan.
Here.
Aaron Pehan.
Here.
Jacqueline Smith.
Present.
Chet Krauser. Juniper Davis. Donna Gawker. Ryan Hammond.
Present.
Lynn Hellegard.
Present.
Jeremy Keene.
Present.
Ben Weiss. Ian Ortlieb.
Here.
Tiffany Brander. Brian Elstad.
Present.
Bynum Jackson. Eva Rock. Emily Brock. And last, Katie Potts.
This is Vicky Cernich, proxy for Katie Potts.
Thank you. And let me know if I missed anybody else.
Okay. Thanks, Bella. I have approval of minutes on the agenda, but I don't see anything attached. Do we have minutes from our last meeting, or do we have none because we didn't meet last month?
I had the ones uploaded from the June meeting, but when I republished, they didn't get attached again.
Okay, why don't we just hold those over till the next meeting and we can take care of those at that time.
Sounds good.
Okay, any public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to new business. 3 items of new business. First item is review and approval of the FY 2022 Unified Planning Work Program.
Yeah, all right. Well, this first item of business is something we do around this time every year. It really sets the work plan and how we're going to spend our transportation planning funds for the year, the next federal fiscal year starting October 1. So yeah, the Unified Planning Work Program, there is a draft attached. I will point out before I get started that we've gotten some sort of late comments that we were adding to and editing the UPWP that's posted, and so the current attachment is the most current draft, and I'll go through some of those changes before we get to the end and adoption. But essentially, I'll kind of walk through this, look at what is changing for the upcoming fiscal year, what projects we have that we're working on as MPO staff, and where we're putting those PL funds. And then have 1 or 2 sort of recommendations that aren't necessarily included yet, but that we want to consider for additional funding. So with that, I think I'll dive in and start with, let me share my screen here. I don't have a PowerPoint. I thought might be easier just to walk through the UPWP itself and show you directly what we're talking about. So can everyone see my screen and see the draft UPWP showing? I'll assume yes if I don't hear from anyone. So the UPWP is our work program for the next year. So it's the federal fiscal year starting October 1 and running through September 30th of 2022. And so we start development of the UPWP every year with our PL fund allocation. So we get a letter from Montana Department of Transportation that shows us what we're receiving in PL funds. And so just to give you an idea of what we've got coming for this year. So we had our estimate of our FY22 allocation of about $700,000. So that's our annual allocation of PL funds. We had a release of 2020 PL funds. So those are funds that we had listed in the FY 2020 UPWP that we didn't use. Some of that comes from consulting projects like the long range transportation plan, where we were showing the full project cost, but we maybe only got through 50% of that in the given fiscal year, or a project that we had planned to do in FY 20 and didn't get started until FY 21. So there were a number of funds, about $240,000 that were released from 2020 that we add to that balance. And then we had a remaining unobligated fund balance of about $450,000. And so total, all of those give us around $1,400,000, just shy of 1.4 million. And then we have always had an agreement that we would release 13.42% of our PL fund allocation to MDT for use in statewide planning. And that is in part because the state covers the local match on our PL funds, and then we allow or essentially transfer back those funds for use on sort of the statewide planning outside of MPO urbanized areas. And so that is a little over $80,000 for this upcoming fiscal year, which leaves us with $1,313,000 available in PL funds. That's sort of where we're starting with the total amount of funding that we have available to work with for this year, and to think about our reserve funds for upcoming years. The other funds that are included in the UPWP are 5303. Those are transit planning funds. And so we get an annual allocation of those. Those funds go to the 3 MPOs for use in transit planning. In Missoula, our allocation for the upcoming fiscal year is $146,000. That's just the federal share. There's also a local match associated with that. So the total 5303, including federal and local match, is a little over $180,000. So that's the funding that's going into the UPWP. Are there any questions about those funds before I get started on how we're planning to spend them, or how we're recommending to spend those funds? Great. Not stop me at any point if you have questions as I go through this. So the UPWP is broken up into, and this will be familiar for those of you who've been on the committee for a while, but the UPWP is broken up into several work elements. That the large sort of major classes of work elements include our program support and administration. That's sort of the day-to-day operation of the MPO. Our budgeting, working on things like the UPWP, our general public involvement, communicating about the MPO, participating in committees and meetings on behalf of the MPO, sort of all of that routine day-to-day administrative work. Our long-range planning work element is really where we focus on the core of our planning work. So that includes the long-range transportation plan, our area plans like the bicycle facilities master plan, pedestrian plan, the Highway 200 corridor study, sort of all of those sub-plans that would fall underneath the long-range transportation plan. This is also where we have our data collection efforts, things like our automated counters, our urban traffic count program, our transportation model. We maintain that model. We won't do another update probably until our next long range plan, but we do use that model for a variety of purposes, including supporting corridor plans or doing traffic analysis for growth analysis for different development projects or any of those uses that would require the travel model. So basically all of our long range planning efforts fall under this long range planning work program. Then we have our short range transportation planning. A lot of this is focused around our transit system, but also working on planning for older adults and persons with disabilities. So we have our Special Transportation Advisory Committee that includes a number of different stakeholders to think about how we're planning around those specific topics. Some of the specific transit planning efforts that Mountain Line. So a lot of the 5303 funds get programmed under these work element 500 parts of the UPWP. And then there are some other administrative pieces of the MPO like development and maintenance of the Transportation Improvement Program, our air quality and environmental planning that we do, and then ensuring that we're implementing the Americans with Disabilities Act. So all of those take a certain amount of our time and our funding to work through those requirements. And then finally, the UPWP lays out our reserve funding. So sort of what we have in reserve in PL funds that we're saving for future expenses in future fiscal years. And then some summaries about our overall funding and how it all fits together. So that's the overview of what's in the UPWP. I'll go through kind of each one of these sections. Most of them we'll go through pretty quickly because there's not a lot of changes. But before I get to those specific funding elements, we also have details in the plan about our performance measures. So we're required to ensure that our work program is helping to promote the federally required performance measures that include safety, pavement, bridge condition, freight, sort of all of those measures that we are working to support the state to meet those targets that the state has established. So as an MPO, we're supporting the state in meeting those targets. And so we want to make sure our work that we're doing as the MPO is helping to further those progress on those performance measures. So going into the specific work programs, as I mentioned, the first work elements related to administration, there's not a lot that has changed there. This is work that we typically do every year. It includes our ongoing administration of the MPO, so things like budgeting, reporting, some of the personnel management that we do, and just administering the program. And so those activities will largely remain the same. And you'll note in the UPWP under each program element, we have our accomplishments from FY21 listed and then our proposed activities for FY22. And so this is a good place to go to see what we've accomplished in the previous year as an MPO and what we're hoping to work on in the upcoming fiscal year and how it fits into each of these program elements. We also have, we like to focus on staff training and opportunities that really improve the technical and planning skills of the MPO and partners. And so we'll continue to attend conferences, do training, and increase our knowledge and skills as staff and as an MPO. So that hasn't changed a lot. And then interagency coordination will continue to do those efforts where we're working with our partners on a number of different committees. You can see this list of committees that and groups that we participate in feels like it gets longer every year. This year we've added a couple additional committees that the MPO is participating in, including the Missoula Economic Partnerships Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy Steering Committee. And so we've been participating in that and just a whole host of other activities where we can bring transportation expertise to the table. So we'll continue doing that through FY22. So summarizing, I won't again go into too much detail on these tables, but when we break down our hours for both the MPO and for Mountain Line staff, and then there is funding allocated to each one of those entities, whether it's PL or FTA funds. So then I'll skip down to our long-range planning, because this is where most of the changes in this UPWP are occurring. This is the bulk of the work that we do around planning and activities for the MPO. And so we accomplished a lot in FY21 in the long-range transportation plan, which is the first work element. We have our long-range plan adopted. We just got the letter approving the conformity of that plan from FHWA a week or two ago. And so we are now good to go on our long-range transportation plan. So that was the bulk of our work over the last year. And so in FY22, we are fairly substantially reducing our hours committed to the long-range plan. We still have a lot that we're proposing just to make sure we're continuing implementation and communicating about the long-range plan. I think one of the things we realized as we've done a number of these updates is that we need to make sure we're communicating about the long-range plan in between updates. And so we'll focus efforts on talking about what we have adopted as opposed to what we intend to, and making sure that we're including the long-range plan in a whole host of activities like growth policy updates or other projects, and just continue to build familiarity with the long-range transportation plan. So we won't have any consultant budget for this upcoming year, but we will have some staff time. And so you can see there's a pretty substantial drop in our budget related to long-range transportation plan. Then area plans, we've also done a lot of work over the last year or two on area plans. So in FY21, we were continuing to work on the Reserve Street Community Input Project. That is likely to wrap up in FY21, where we have a final forum presentation next week, where we're hoping to kind of wrap that up with the community, and then we'll come back to TTAC with the presentation on that final report. And so that project is wrapping up. We continue to implement the bicycle and pedestrian facilities plans. We adopted the East Missoula Highway 200 corridor plan, and then participated in some other activities, including working with the downtown master plan, and some of the other activities that have been going on, and getting some projects up and running, like the participating in the county's trails and pathways plan, and with the Brooks corridor plan. So a lot has happened in that realm of area plans. For 2022, a lot of those projects are going to continue. And so let me get down to our consultants. So we have the bulk of our budget here is going towards consultants to work on a number of projects. The biggest of which for the MPO staff is the Higgins Corridor Study that's underway in FY21, and we intend to wrap that up in FY22. So that project is ongoing. We think the Midtown Master Plan is finally gaining some steam, and looks like it may be getting off the ground either late FY21 or FY22. And so we have some funds committed there. Again, the county commuter trails and active transportation plan, I think that's officially being called the county pathways and trails transportation plan. That's up and running. And so we're supporting that with both funding and some staff time. And then we continue to want to invest in passenger rail, and if we can get there, doing some fiscal growth analysis. So those things continue. Passenger rail, there's some activities happening. We're hoping the county and the Passenger Rail Authority are moving forward with an initial kind of scoping feasibility study, and then we'll hopefully be building on that in FY22. So a lot of work, a lot of our focus is going to shift to these area plans in the next fiscal year. And that's reflected in part in our budget here. So then transportation data, we're going to continue in this year. We've been ramping up our automated temporary bicycle pedestrian count program. And so we've been putting our automated eco counters out in locations throughout the city and the urban area all summer. We're going to continue doing that. And so we're collecting really good data. We are putting those out for essentially a week at a time for each location. So we're getting much better consistent data for those locations than we would get through our volunteer count program. We also restarted our volunteer counts this year coming out of COVID. And so we're continuing to collect that data. And we'll continue with our traffic program, developing a data dashboard coming out of the long range transportation plan, and really focusing on how do we collect and present the data that helps us communicate where we're at in transportation. So a lot of work and a fair amount of budget being focused there just to continue to collect and expand our available data around transportation systems. And then within this 300 work element, we have our transportation options. So this is our work around what Missoula in Motion does, the bicycle pedestrian program, looking at kind of the education outreach side of the work that we do, and thinking about trip distributions and how we meet our mode split goals in ways that are not just infrastructure investments. So in FY22, we're proposing to, and we have started on this project in FY21, but we have our transportation options action plan where we're going to look at ways that we can more formalize our transportation options activities that aren't just events and encouragement, but maybe build that into doing some regulatory audits, creating some recommendations around development and growth and how we make transportation options programming sort of inherent in all of the work that we do, and how that fits into development and growth and business growth in Missoula. So that's going to be the bulk of what we do for transportation options in the coming year. So next, where I want to get to, let me see where we're at. So in work element 500, this is where most of the 5303 funds are going. Mountain Line has hours associated with all of those other work elements as well, but you'll note in this UPWP, we're reducing our expenses around some of these work elements. We have less 5303 funding than we did in FY21. Some of that is just due to not having a carryover balance. So we increased our hours in a lot of these work elements for transit in FY21. And so FY22, they're coming back down. We'll still be focused on a lot of the same activities. So continuing to participate in the Specialized Transportation Advisory Committee, working on planning for aging population and people with disabilities. And Mountain Line will continue to do a lot of that work as well, including work around shuttles and other services that they conduct. On the transit system management, I think this is where we had more changes in work accomplished and work planned for FY22 from Mountain Line. Some additional hours there for the work that they do, or just around transit system planning. And then I think this is, let's see. So under the transportation plan, work element 502, preparation of updated transit development plan, Mountain Line is planning to start work on their strategic long range plan in FY22. And so you'll see more hours allocated there. And we have this consultant budget. We will be adding one of the things we've noticed that we need to amend on this before TPCC approval is just noting that this $180,000 for a long range plan, some of that is coming from federal funds. So if you'll remember in our UPWP amendment that we approved a month or two ago, we had some additional statewide transit funds that got transferred into our 5303 for Mountain Line to use on this long range plan. So there's part of this 180,000 is 60,000 in 5303 funds with 15,000 local match. So but that was programmed in the FY21 UPWP. So it's not necessarily reflected here in our overall funding tables for FY22. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's really the bulk. Not much has changed with the TIP. We'll continue to make updates and make sure we have a transportation improvement program. And Charlie will be presenting that next. And then continuing with our air quality and ADA work over the next couple of years. So a lot of me talking about the activities, but hopefully that gives a good sense of what we plan to do over the upcoming year and where our efforts are going to be focused and where we're investing our PL funds. So with that, I will stop sharing and see if there, well, before I get to questions, there is one other request that we had for PL funds that we didn't have time to get integrated into the UPWP yet, but is a request coming from the city to increase our PL funding for personnel by about $35,000 to help fund a new position in it would be, the idea is that it's a short-term funding from the MPO, paying for about 50% of an FTE to really focus on project development and implementing our plans. So we have an infrastructure bill that looks like it's potentially it's working its way through Congress. There could be a lot of federal funding available through a number of different direct apportionment programs or grant funding. And in order to manage that workload, we're going to need some additional staff capacity, sort of at all levels. And it's a place where I think that the MPO can help in helping to fund a position that is really focused on helping get projects developed and ready to go and implemented. There's a caveat that we can't use PL funds for engineering and project construction, but we can really help with grant applications, managing projects through those early phases, getting conceptual design ready, helping to develop projects to a point where we can then hand it off to engineering, essentially ready to go for that preliminary engineering and construction. And so those PL funds would be going towards that position to really focus on project development, making sure that we are as ready to be as possible for just getting projects done, and not so much on the long range planning and those aspects. So that would be a request of, I believe it's a little over $35,000. And if there's an interest from TTAC and TPCC to fund that, anticipate it would be for a couple of years to help offset the costs of the city. And then as we get more of that funding and working through the city's funding side, that we would sort of phase out the PL contributions, particularly as new MPOs come online and our PL funds decrease in future year. We're anticipating a decrease in direct PL fund allocations, so we don't want to have too much of a personnel liability that we're not able to pay for, but we could at least start these first couple of years, get somebody on board, start working on these projects when we really need to be to maximize our use of those potential federal funds, or getting those funds, whether it's a grant or just being able to have the staff capacity to develop projects and get them to the point where we can construct them. So that's one additional request that we have that's not currently reflected in this, but if that's something that TTAC supports, and we could add that into the motion to approve the UPWP, including the funding for 50% of a full FTE into our personnel costs. So I think with that, I'll leave it open for questions and comments from the committee.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. This is an action item, so questions from the committee, and then we'll be looking for a motion. I have Ben Weiss.
Thanks. I guess my question is about that most recent, that last item that you brought up, Aaron. Do you have any concerns about that use of PL funds from I know that you like to keep money kind of going, saving up a little bit each year so that when the LRTP comes around, you have plenty of savings to be able to do that. Are you at all concerned about that new, if we use some PL funding for that new position, does that tap into your resources to do other planning projects? Are there what are the trade-offs there?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's something I've thought a lot about. And in the short term, I don't think it's a huge impact on our PL funds. So let me share my screen so I can describe this a little bit better. So in our overall funding, let me go down to where we're at. So given our current budget, and we have a lot of projects that we're funding with PL funds for the last several years, we've been, doing a lot of planning work and hiring consultants for projects. given all, our current budget and all the projects that we have planned for the next fiscal year, we would be left with a reserve of about little over $500,000. Thinking about a long range plan update, our most recent update was, more expensive than I think we had initially anticipated. But it ended up being about $400,000. Our next long range plan update, we should not have to do the same level of work that we did. I mean, we have what I think is a really good plan. And so we could, look at maybe doing more of a tweak or just updating some of those details and projects and not do a complete rewrite. So we have some reserve balance there. I guess the other piece is that we're going to be reducing, we're going to likely see a reduced PL annual allocation. And so we want to be thinking about that. So I guess short, to get to your specific question, I wouldn't be worried if it was, a year or two of funding, a couple of years of funding to get to a point where the city can fund that at a full 100%. I think, we're looking at $100,000 to $120,000 over 3 years. So I don't know if that answers your question, Ben, but that's something I think this committee needs to consider is, what potential projects might we have? Does that seem like a reasonable use of those reserve PL funds?
So we're going to have Ryan and then Corey.
Hi, Aaron. Forgive me if you already answered this and I missed it, but for this position, do you intend to advertise it as a term position, or would you just hope to, reduce those costs in the out years through attrition, or how do you intend for that to work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that we've fully gotten there. I think we could do a temporary position to start until we have sort of the final funding at the city level committed to get that to 100%.
Okay, thanks.
Corey?
So help me understand, are you saying you're going to use MPO funds to fund a city position?
Well, it would be 50% MPO funded and then 50% city funded. And so that, I think we could look at that position. At this point, it's focused primarily on city projects, but I think we could look at opportunities to have that position coordinate with county and with Mountain Line to help pursue those federal funds as well. I mean, I think the more we can collaborate on those projects, the better. And having a staff person who's really is focused on getting projects ready for construction and delivery, more so than the long range planning that we have done historically. And so, I think that could be a point of discussion too. And Jeremy, feel free to weigh in if you have thoughts on what you think from the city side that could look like, but it would be in infrastructure and mobility division within the city. And so it could be sort of a bridge between MPO and city staff and help really focus on that project delivery.
So yeah, so my perspective on this is that we've done a lot of really good planning. We have a number of good plans with the long range transportation plan, with the East Missoula plan. We are working on the Higgins plan, and we're kind of at a point where those plans have set us up to chase funding for specific projects, but we're lacking the implementation step of getting those projects scoped and refined into a specific project that we can then start engineering on. And I think that's where we lack staff. And that's not just the city. That's with the county and the MDT level in terms of just getting those projects ready to go. And so I think that this staff position, while it would certainly benefit city projects, it would also benefit the MPO. And that's why we've talked about doing it as a 50-50.
Emily, did you have a question?
Yeah, so it's the person reports to you, Aaron, right? And then you still report I mean, you'd still report to this board. So if we felt like if we felt like it was too city focused, we could let you know and we could have some say over that, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that 50% that's MPO funded, we have to program into the UPWP and show where those hours are being spent. And I think that's where this committee has the ability to help direct where that capacity is being directed. And I think, Jeremy's right that I think there's a distinct need and we've seen this on a lot of projects where we need to start getting them scoped and getting to the point where we can put it out for engineering and know exactly what it is we're doing and know what grant funding we would be applying for and what the scope of that project is. And we just don't have that. And I think having some staff capacity to really work through those highest priority projects and start getting them in the queue is going to be really helpful for us, especially given the extent of federal funding that might be becoming available over the next couple of years.
So what we saw with ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, was that there was very suddenly a lot of money available for water and sewer infrastructure. And we scrambled to get our programs together and make applications for that money, which was competitive grants. And so I think we should be preparing for the same thing in transportation, that we're going to see an influx of money. A lot of it will come through the traditional programs that we've seen, but there will be more money available for grants. And so I think we should think about how we get ourselves positioned for that in Missoula as the MPO.
I think you're going to may run into some pushback at some point. I guess I'm unclear if MPO funds can be used to push forward city projects. I know it's a 50-50, but that may be some challenge.
So yeah, we should clarify what we're talking about is federally funded projects in the MPO. So these are projects that would occur, through the transportation plan or other planning documents that we've done as the MPO. So we're not talking about funding city sidewalk projects with this position. We're talking about implementing the MPO's plans, and this gives us capacity to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's an important clarification. That the long range plan is awesome, and it really is, for the whole metropolitan planning area. We just want to make sure, I think, for those of us that aren't focused on the city necessarily, that it doesn't just get sucked into the urban core when we're seeing so much growth and pressure in transit and in the urban fringe and in rural areas.
Yeah, no.
As someone who would likely be working with this person, if this gets approved and then they get hired, I of course would welcome the help and assistance. I mean, my position, we've had one person in this job since 1979, when Missoula was fewer than 30,000 people and less than a third of the square miles that it is today. And so anything we can do to get more personnel to work on the sorts of things that we're working on, I think is important. And I'm confident that we can make a balance or find a balance for this, and be using the federal funds appropriately. So it's something that I'd be very supportive of.
But ultimately, you'd come to us with what projects you're working on anyways. So, right? We would know what grants you're applying for and where your focus is. So it's not like you can just take the position and run with it. Not that those city projects aren't worthy. So I support it.
Yeah, and I think we've got a couple of big county projects that we're wanting to move forward, including the Highway 200. We have that corridor plan. We want to get that project funded and start to implement. And there's a lot of coordination around, just developing that further. And so I think we can continue to collaborate on all of those projects.
So is this an action item?
Yes.
So, yeah, we're looking for a recommendation to TPCC to approve this UPWP plan. And I would ask if we want to include the staff position, that we include that as a modification.
I'll make the motion and include the staff position in the motion.
Thanks, Emily.
I'll second. This is Corey.
Thanks, Corey. Seconded by Corey.
Yep.
Okay, do we have any additional discussion on the motion? Any public comment? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor signal aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Thanks for the good explanation on that, Aaron. Move on to our next agenda item, which is review and approval of the FY 2022 through 2026 Transportation Improvement Program.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'm going to share my screen real quick and pull up this presentation for you all. So I'm here to introduce our new tip that is for the federal fiscal year timeframe of 2022 to 2026. In this tip, it's important to note, as Aaron mentioned, that our long-range plan has received conformity from FHWA and FTA, as well as the EPA in late July 26th. So the TIP document has received updates to reflect that the project list is in accordance with our latest long-range transportation plan update. Overview of this presentation, we're going to get into some TIP table changes, so some minor changes to projects that overlap into this new year timeframe. We also have project nominations that came about from a call for projects, and we're going to discuss those project nominations that are eligible for CMAQ funds. So the TIP project changes include new projects as well as minor and major project cost changes. So the first one is within the Surface Transportation Program Urban. So that's the Russell Street, Dakota to Mount. And it saw a reduction of $500,000 in incidental construction, which was transferred forward into the construction segment of the project in FFY 2024. Interstate Missoula project, or Interstate Maintenance Project, Missoula to Bonner, saw a construction cost increase. This is a minor cost increase of just over $88,000, and this was a closeout that occurred in FFY pre-2022. Within the National Highways funding section, the Reserve Street Missoula project saw a construction cost increase of $1.4 million, and this is a closeout as it occurred in FFY pre-2022. Within the National Highway Freight Program, the Missoula East-West Van Buren interchange saw a cost decrease of $3.1 million as a closeout. Within the Surface Transportation Program off system secondary, we saw two changes. First is west of Missoula project. There was a construction cost that is now committed within FY 2026 for the project, and the project total is now $9.3 million. Within the D1 slope stability project, we saw a project cost decrease of $1.8 million. In the railroad crossing section, we saw a cost reduction of just a few $1,000s in as a closeout in FFY pre-2022 section. Within the funding section, Highway Safety Improvement Program, We have an addition of just a few $1,000s for incidental construction for the Stevens and Orange Safety Improvement Project. For the SF 199 Mary Jane Broadway interchange, we saw a project cost increase of about $1 million as they close out in that pre-2022 section. Okay. My computer is freezing up on me. In the bridge program, we have Russell Street, which saw a cost from Broadway to Idaho. It saw a cost decrease of $1.7 million, or almost $1.8 million as a closeout in the pre-2022 area. We saw an addition of a new project, which is the Orange Street Tunnel, and that project total is just over $14 million. Within the urban pavement preservation, we saw two project changes. We saw a decrease for the 5th and 6th Street pavement preservation, and this is just a minor cost change of $32,000 as a closeout. On Clements 3rd Speedway and Deer Creek pavement preservation project, we saw a total decrease that's minor as well of just over $23,000. In the Mackey section, Montana Air and Congestion Initiative, we saw an increase of just a few $1,000s as a closeout, or not as a closeout, within the construction section in FY 2022. So now we're on to transit changes. In the TA, this was an addition of expended funds in FY pre-2022 for almost $800,000 or over $800,000, noting the expenditures on Missoula ADA upgrades project. In the Federal Transit Administration section 5307, we had an addition of $300,000 that will be expended on bus passenger amenities in FY 2023. We also saw added funding for purchase of buses. This is an additional project of just over $3 million through ARPA federal funds. A minor table change that has occurred in the 5339 FTA section is the change of the funding split from local and federal. In the previous table format, it was assumed that the funding split was an 80-20 match, and now it is recognized as a 15-85% match for local to federal. So in mid-July, we put out a call for projects, and this was to see what city and county wanted to submit for discretionary funds. And we have available discretionary funds within CMAQ funding over $5 million. Another form of discretionary funds is surface transportation urban, but those are not available due to committal to the Russell Street project. So we received 9 projects and have another transit bus purchasing project in mind as well. These 9 projects we will go through in depth, but just for an initial review, we have the Bitterroot Trail Bridge at the Clark Fork River. We have the England Boulevard protected bike lanes, the Front Main two-way conversion project I'm sure you all have heard a lot about, Higgins Avenue multimodal improvements, Highway 200 shared use path. This is also referred to as the Bonner Streetcar Trail, Kent Central Neighborhood Greenway intersections, Mullen Road Complete Street, and this is a shared use path project, South Avenue multimodal improvements, as well as traffic signal optimization, which is included as a program within the recently adopted long-range plan update. So I might have Aaron step in here because he wants to lead the discussion over this. But for a quick review, we've looked at prioritization of the submitted or nominated projects, and we're looking not only at the long-range transportation plan project scores, but also project quality comparison, as the long-range plan is sort of a larger planning level comparison, and we wanted to just look and see at sort of the suitability and constructability at more depth for this list specifically. So in our, go ahead, Aaron.
I would say, just before we get too far into this, and it looks like Corey and Ben both had questions, and I want to make sure we don't get too far beyond
Yes,
their questions.
sorry, can't.
Clarification.
Just look. Yeah, I do not see their.
Mine's just a quick comment. You had listed ARPA funds for one of the projects for bus purchases, and I believe it's actually lower no emission grant program award funds. So
Okay.
really minor.
All right, I will make a note of that. This is from table information I received recently from Mountain Line. So
it's in the 5339 section 5339, but it's not ARPA specifically, I believe.
Yeah, and I don't think our tables aren't specific to where those funds are coming from in 5339, and so I think the tip should be good on that. But it'd be good to check and make sure from Mountain Line's perspective, make sure we have the right funds in the right place. Ben, did you have a question you wanted to?
I did. I was curious about that TA allocation, the transportation alternatives of 800. Can you provide some clarification on where that's going and what that amount is? Because as far as I know, we haven't had a successful grant. We haven't been awarded any TA lately. And so, could you provide some more information about that?
I might have to have Corey step in on this one, as it is a Mountain Line expenditure, but our latest tip tables recognize that there has been money expended prior to this fiscal year for those ADA upgrades. It was not included in our previous tip amendment. Go ahead.
That's an MDT project that ADA upgrades been previously funded through the air congestion initiative. So I don't know if Vicky or Jacqueline have any background on the use of TA funds or how that funding split worked out.
This is Vicky, and off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure if you guys will remember. This was a project that was the TA that was it Hellgate High School got in the last round, and then there was also the ADA stuff that was going on at the same time. And so to save some time and money and MOB charges, they just glommed the two together.
I think we all remember the Hellgate project.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we remember both of those. I just didn't realize that one. Okay, thanks, Vicky. That really helps.
Okay, I have an unknown guest with their hand up. Could you state your name, please, and your question?
I'm guessing that's me, Jeremy. Okay.
Hi, Shane.
I don't know why I come up as unknown, but that's all right. Just a quick question on the CMAQ funding nominations. And I know there was quite a list. Can you tell us what the total sum of those nominations are and how much funding you actually have?
Sorry, Shane, you were coming in really low on my end. Which nominations were you wanting clarification on?
Just those the CMAQ nominations that were recently submitted. What's the total amount that we have available for that like private meeting? Total sum of all that money? just trying to figure out like how much was requested and then how much do we have available?
Yeah, that is what we're gonna, maybe that's if there's no other questions on the previous tables, we'll just dive into the CMAQ, because we've got some details about what, or at least preliminary details on what we think is requested and what is available. So I guess I'll start by, oh, go ahead.
I have another question on the previous slides, if we
Okay.
could circle back first. There's a project called West of Missoula that was $9 million. Could you describe what that is?
Sure. Let's go. Mike is gonna look for it. So this is the.
I can jump in, Jeremy. I mean, I know Jacqueline or Vicky would know too, but that's the West of Missoula Northwest, the secondary project on Mullen Road. It's just a reconstruction of Mullen Road from Dayshaw to Pomo Road. The potential of a shared use path included if the county funds it.
Okay, thanks. The other question is, last year we talked about Reserve Street. I'm still not clear what the original project cost was and now what the total project cost. If I heard right, it's another $1.3 million increase to that project. And I think last year it was $3 million increase. And we're now pushing, looks like $10 million on that pavement preservation project.
So the total project cost is $9.7 million for this TIP time frame. There may have been expenditure in the previous time frame that has been dropped out of that total.
Yeah, it looks, just looking at it's not, so our previous pre FY22 expenses were almost $9 million. And so it looks like there was really like more of a small adjustment of $400,000 or $500,000 there. Just in terms of project closeout. I don't know if Jacqueline or anyone from MDT has, but that's something we could get some more details on where those project costs are coming from, but it's not additional costs in future fiscal years. It's sort of closeout from, and it's not 9 million, multiple millions. It looks like it's only about $500,000 or $600,000 increase from the last TIP amendment.
Jeremy, that's something I'd have to dig up right now, but I can get you information later on.
Okay, thanks. I continue to be confused by the role of the MPO and this committee in approving funding for those projects or selecting which projects are being done. I know that's not part of our discretionary funding, but we're also asked to approve the funding for them. So I'm not clear. I continue to be confused by why we're asked to do that.
I'll chime in on that. The reason that we're asked is because TPCC has always looked at us as the experts in transportation. So they're looking for us to give them recommendations. They can certainly ignore any recommendations that we give them, and they have in the past. So they're just looking for people that have more direct knowledge in this stuff than they have.
And related to the MPO's role, bigger picture, that for the funding, and this is going to sort of overly simplify it, but all federal funding has to be included in the TIP, and that Missoula MPO is responsible for approving and managing the transportation improvement program. And so we're essentially adopting this, but we don't have discretionary authority over those funding sources like national NH funds in order to program the projects. And so it's sort of like a veto that the MPO has if we wanted to exercise that. Is the really short answer. It's sort of an up or down, yes or no, but it doesn't allow us to say we want to fund this project with those funds. That is really the state's role as the programming those funds on a statewide level, if that's helpful. So I think our role is in part to make sure that the funding that is being spent is consistent with the long range transportation plan, and looking at the TIP as a whole and making sure that we are making the investments we need to on the long range transportation plan. However, the actual programming of projects and management of those projects is managed by MDT. So Ryan, did you have more to add to that?
Yeah, I know it's crude, but I think thinking of it in cases like this anyway as a veto is an appropriate way to conceptualize it. I mean, so that's one point that I like to make. And then the other one that you've probably heard me say before is that MDT is also part of the MPO. That I don't know how much relevance that has on this particular question, but that's also those are the two big key points I like to keep in mind in cases like this. But yeah, that's right. As Aaron said, I mean, it's your role to adopt a long-range plan and make sure that all the projects programmed in your planning area are consistent with that long-range plan. You can't force MDT to make different decisions on the funding streams it controls, but you do have the right to say no if it's inside your planning area. So
I guess, my concern with it is that all of these projects occur within the MPO boundary, but we're not involved at all with selecting which projects or looking at the trade-offs between different projects that could be done. They come to us with a number and we're asked to just rubber stamp it and approve it in the TIP. And maybe that's the way it works, but it just doesn't seem like it's a very collaborative process to look at what are the highest needs. And I guess that comes through the transportation plan, but I'm just not totally clear what our role is in that, and whether we should be having, as this committee, as a technical committee that should be, like Lynn said, having that technical knowledge of what these projects are and what they're about. We're not having a lot of conversation about that. So they go through, and I don't know if that's something that the other folks on this committee think we should have more conversation about or should be able to weigh in on, but right now those projects just happen. And, roll on for
yeah, that. You mentioned something just now, I think is the key there. I mean, the place where the MPO has the most independent ability to shape the construction schedule of projects that it's in the long range planning process, because nothing can be tipped that isn't consistent with the long range plan. So if there's any project that the MPO specifically didn't want to do, that would be the place to contemplate it and to have the most influence. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the discussion on that. Jacqueline?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to pose the question of what else. I don't fully see it that the MPO or maybe the city is not involved in the nomination of all of our projects, especially when they're in the MPO area. Obviously, in the district, we've got a larger area that we're looking at, but I guess I was feeling and thinking that the city and the MPO and the county are in those early conversations when projects get nominated. And so I guess I'm looking for some input on where you're seeing that it's falling short.
In my mind, it's maybe part of the scoping process. I mean, I think that if Reserve Street is just using that as an example, it was a resurfacing project, but there's been a striping project on Reserve for at least the last 2 LRTP updates and maybe even longer to add buffered bike lanes. And maintenance is a great time to do those sorts of projects. But by the time the project was nominated and put forward, the scope of changing striping wasn't even on the table. And so how do we get involved at that early stage to look at the scope of those projects and ensure that if we're going to do something like a $10 million maintenance project, that we actually achieve the goals and the project, implement the projects that are in the long range plan when we do it.
So we do have city staff are invited to the scoping meetings. Are we not including the right staff to those meetings?
I wonder if there's a question here, Jacqueline and Jeremy, about we've had some presentations kind of about MDT's process for funding, and we had some discussions several months ago, and I wonder if sort of the next follow-up, if I'm remembering correctly of what we did talk about, it is maybe looking at sort of a 5 or 10 year outlook for the district and sort of where the priorities lie, and what projects may be on the horizon. I know there were some in the long range plan that we've been talking about, and we could talk through those projects and when we think they might get funded and where there's an opportunity to collaborate, but maybe just thinking about sort of, and I guess that could happen at a staff level or at a committee level, wherever is most effective, but starting to have that conversation about sort of what's coming up more longer term so that we can be identifying areas for collaboration, or like what Ben's talking about earlier in the process. Because I even think at a scoping meeting, that might be if you don't have the right person in the room, it's going to be hard to know, or so that may be one idea of a way that we can help facilitate these conversations. And then thinking about TIP amendments, I think it's important to differentiate sort of new projects that are being programmed versus projects that are already programmed and are seeing changes in project costs. Because it's, I guess if you would think of it from the city's perspective, if there's a CIP project and we're getting a budget amendment, as those projects get further along in the design and engineering or construction process, that you often have changes to your costs. And it seems like they rarely go down, although that does happen occasionally. And so I don't know that the TIP approval is really the right place. Maybe it is the right place, but some of those project amendments are just, as you're going from planning to engineering to construction, your costs are going to change over time. And so a lot of what we're seeing in these amendments are those changes just in the project costs. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't want to bog us down here. I think that the process that we're about to go through with the CMAQ funding, where we have a list of nominated projects, we have a discussion about which ones are the highest priority, it would be helpful to do the same thing with NH and pavement preservation and other funding that comes into the urban area. And often we don't have a lot of input until there's a project already programmed. And I think Ben's example of just trying to align our priorities is a good one, to say, these would be the streets we would want to focus on, or these would be the elements of that street that would be important to consider in the project scoping. So that's the piece that hasn't happened in the past, and I think we have an opportunity to do that better going forward. I think West Broadway pavement pres is a really good example. Another one that's coming up, where there's a lot of intersection of a lot of different projects that are happening. We should get out ahead of that one so that the scoping process is clear for everybody.
Well, I think this is, unless there are specific projects that there's concern with in this TIP amendment, I think this is something that, Vicki, Jacqueline, we can put our heads together, and Jeremy, and maybe at some of our other coordinating meetings, we can have this as a discussion topic about how we can better present these projects and continue, because we've been having these conversations over the past year or two, and I think they're good and will get us in a better spot if we can come up with the right process to present projects and to collaborate. So maybe we'll put our heads together between now and the next DTAC meeting or the next month or two and come up with a strategy to continue the conversation. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, Aaron, I'm up for that.
Sounds great, Aaron.
All right. Well, we've got a fair amount to get through. So maybe coming back to CMAQ, I don't think we need to make any decisions on this today in terms of the tip adoption. But I do want to keep this conversation moving forward. And so maybe as a summary and to wrap up the tip amendment, we have these projects that were nominated, and we have a limited amount of funding in CMAQ, and we'll get to sort of what's available and what the requests are, or tentative requests are. But really, as Charlie introduced, we have our long range transportation project, where we looked at the whole range of projects that we could fund across the region over the next 30 years and scored them and prioritized. And so we have that as sort of one way to look at projects and sort of where did they fall on that priority. But we're looking at a specific funding source here. And so there's a little bit more of a refined approach that we want to take to thinking about what do we fund first, or which are the highest priority projects. And there are some elements that maybe weren't included in the long range plan scoring, like project readiness. Charlie, if you can go to the next slide that has the actual criteria. So a lot of these have very similar criteria to what we use in all of our prioritization, just based on our region's priorities, including our equity and housing access being really important right now, both at the MPO and at the city and county level. CMAQ, we really need to look closely at congestion and emissions reductions. We should be, with that funding, the intent is to manage our air quality. I mean, that is the purpose of that funding program. And so that needs to be an important piece of how we prioritize project. What's going to have the biggest impact on our long-term air quality and emissions reductions. And then looking at other things like crash reductions, taking a more refined look at what potential there is to reduce safety issues. And then what are our overall multimodal transportation benefits and connectivity for that specific project. And this is an opportunity to sort of look at prioritizing a subset of projects, not just the whole long range transportation plan priority. So that's kind of our primary criteria that we developed through our CMAQ subcommittee that met several years. I guess it's been a little over a year now. We sort of put on hold while we were going through the long range plan to see if that planning process would help us get some more clarity, which I think it did. So then we have some other secondary criteria that are important as we're getting into actually funding projects. And this is something we talk about in a lot of our prioritization, but looking at project readiness, the capacity of a sponsor to get the project done in the year that it's so thinking about timing of programming these projects based on existing capacity. Looking at how scalable the project is, can we do smaller parts of it first, or can we get started on it with some CMAQ funding and potentially finish it over several years? And then regional significance, mode split benefits, and then looking really at leverage and investment potential. So are there other funding sources that we can leverage with CMAQ to help, are we closing a gap in a project that wouldn't happen without CMAQ, but we're not paying for the whole thing? Or are we, are there other aspects of the funding that are more than just funding a whole project with CMAQ? So are we getting more out of our investment than we otherwise would? So those are kind of the criteria that we at staff level has started to look at these projects and put them into a priority. So Charlie, if you want to go to the next slide. So maybe Charlie, we'll skip through these specific project locations because we're running low on time and I want to get to sort of where we're at with these. But I think hopefully everyone is fairly familiar with these projects. We talked about them in the long range plan, and you can reference some of these maps, and we'll share this slideshow. But when we looked at ranking these projects, we first looked at the LRTP score and looked at sort of where the priority was for each project in the long range plan. And then we looked at those criteria that we just went through and did sort of I don't want to call it scoring, just sort of looked at how well each one of these projects addressed each one of those criteria and gave it sort of a general ranking of yes, it does that well, or no, it doesn't. And then kind of put that together and put them into a general ranking. This doesn't have to be set in stone, but it's a way to start to look at how these projects address each one of those. And we could present more detail on that if that's something that this committee is interested in. sort of on the specific criteria. But when we looked at those kind of side by side, we see some projects that really start to emerge at the top. So the front main two-way conversion was a high long range plan score, and it did, matched a lot of the criteria that we discussed. Higgins is another one that addressed a number of those criteria. And then kind of going down the list, the Mullen Road, called Mullen Road Complete Street, but this is really the shared use path. It's part of the build grant that wasn't funded, connecting Reserve Street to Mary Jane shared use path. And then the Highway 200 shared use path ended up scoring fairly well under the specific CMAQ criteria. So this is sort of how we've started looking at these. Again, I think there are other factors that go into this selection. And one is just what type of facility are we looking at? So a good example is the Highway 200 shared use path and the front main two-way conversion are on the urban system, and Highway 200 is an MDT route. And so before we obligate any of those funds, there's still sort of a process to go through in terms of coordinating with MDT on use of their right-of-way, and then going through the Transportation Commission. And so we can't obligate funds until we have Transportation Commission approval on some of these projects. So that's something that we need to think about as we start to prioritize, what are we funding and when are we funding it? And then finally looking at how much money we have to play with versus what we're looking at for each of these projects. And some of these are really rough numbers. We don't necessarily have a fully developed, engineer's estimate for these projects. And so we're kind of estimating what the anticipated CMAQ request would be, and those numbers could or might change depending on what the ultimate cost ends up being and what other local funds are available. So we have about $5.5 million available for in CMAQ. So, and that's through 2026. We have about $4 million available in FY22. So we could start on a project this fiscal year if we felt like there was one that was fully ready and we can just move it along. The other caveat here is one of the projects that's not an infrastructure project, but that we have committed to as an NPO through our long range plan and through our sort of long-term CMAQ planning is bus purchases. So we had planned in our budgeting to have about $1 million to $1.5 million bus purchase within this TIP period. And so out of that $5.5 million, if we're going to continue with that commitment to bus purchases, we would have about $4 million for infrastructure. And you can see most of these projects, maybe we're looking at $1 million of CMAQ as a contribution. Some of that could be higher, like front main, depending on that project's cost and what's available, that could be higher. And so we will want to think about those. And maybe we need more detail before we can fully make that decision. But at this point, I think we're really looking for TTAC's input on how we prioritize these. And given the amount of time we have for discussion, maybe the right thing to do, this is sort of introducing this idea, introducing these projects, and maybe we bring this back next month for this, or over the next couple of months, continue the conversation around CMAQ and have some, we can potentially even having sort of CMAQ or grant TTAC subcommittee meetings to sort of really think through these projects and refine these ideas so that we can come back with a final recommendation. So a couple options for today are adopt the TIP without sort of as presented, which would not include any of these CMAQ projects, knowing that we come back with an amendment after we've done some additional work, which is fine. We'll probably have TIP amendments every couple of months if history is any indication. Or we could have, try to get some of these projects programmed in the TIP now, or make some decisions today. So I think I'll leave that open. yeah, maybe with my recommendation that a little bit more time to talk through these and really get the right projects programmed might be the best approach. So I think, Charlie, did you have anything else on the tip?
Well, I think we should go through our adoption or movement. Another thing, for just some background, we have been promoting this tip amendment or new tip change through a legal ad that has been up for over a month now on the Missoulian, as well as have our tip document posted to our website. This is a standard practice that we do with all tip amendments and tip updates. We've gone through plenty of questions and concerns, and I think that we can, spend a few moments to open up time to discuss how we can further prioritize CMAQ prioritization and selecting projects. But maybe we can finalize with a motion on the table changes to the tip that I presented earlier and leave CMAQ prioritization for later.
And maybe I'll just throw out one more question related to whether we adopt the tip today or not, is a question for MDT on how urgent their getting this tip adopted and in place is for their projects. I don't think there are any local project and for Mountain Line, but I think we have most of their projects covered in our last tip amendment. So I guess that question is for MDT and Mountain Line, how urgent is getting a tip adopted for your projects? Because we could just postpone adoption until we have had that conversation.
Mountain Line can wait.
Aaron, the only one I think might need a little more urgency is the Orange Street Tunnel. We can't get that project going if we don't get this approved.
Okay. So knowing that, maybe the recommendation is to approve the tip as proposed, which is what was attached to the agenda, which would not include the CMAQ projects. And then maybe that motion could direct staff to do some additional work on CMAQ and get that in as an amendment in a month or two.
Thanks, Aaron. That's kind of what I was going to suggest, is that I like the direction we're going with this CMAQ nomination and the types of scoring, but I think that we need more conversations about maybe a small working group to really vet what projects we're going to put forward, since it looked like we're nominating projects that cost about double what we have available or more. And so I will move that we approve the FFY tip 2022 to 2026 as proposed, and that we also try and convene a small working group for CMAQ as soon as we can to present an amendment shortly after this gets adopted.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So we have a motion. Looking for a second.
And I'll
Corey.
second Ben's
Oh,
motion.
I'm sorry, who seconded?
Vicky, I'll second it. And also, I think there is a subcommittee for CMAQ, right? That Ben talked about. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Can you let us know who's on that committee, Aaron? And if anybody else is interested in being on the committee or being part of that discussion, please let us know and we'll get that meeting set up.
Yep. Yeah. Do you want to know who's on it now, or I'd have to dig a little bit? I can send out that.
Maybe you could follow up with an email.
Yep, I can do that.
I think that's a good process. We've got a good list of projects. I think all of those projects have merit. We need to spend a little time going through them and really understanding what they are. Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? Any public comment? Okay, seeing none, let's take a voice vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thanks for the discussion on that. The last agenda item is presentation on the Higgins Corridor Plan.
All right. Well, I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do the quick 2-minute elevator pitch on this since we're almost out of time. Let me just share my screen here. Get it. All right, so I'm gonna skip a bunch of slides on this because we're almost out of time, but I did want to give this committee a quick update on the Higgins Corridor Plan. We're underway on this project. We've started work, we have our consultants on board, and so it's a good time to make sure everyone here is aware of what we're doing and where we're at in the process. So I was going to talk about why we're doing it now, the project team and all that, but I think I'll just go through quickly that as a reminder, we really developed this project out of a number of factors, one being the construction of the Higgins Bridge and all the amazing facilities we're going to get there, and that highlighting sort of the deficiencies on either side, both the north and even more so on the south side of the bridge. And then all of the work that went into looking at Higgins in the downtown master plan, which made put some potential ideas out there, but didn't land on a recommendation of this is what we should do. And really recommended that we do additional study and community outreach and think hard about what we're doing on Higgins to connect a full corridor, essentially from the railroad to Brook Street. And so we're looking at that last remaining portion from Brooks to Broadway, really straddling either side of the bridge. So knowing all of that, we have a team that we've hired with Kittleson and Associates. They're the project lead. They have DJNA, Big Sky PR, and Leland Consulting Group. Leland is a land use sort of economic development firm that will help us on some of the sort of thinking about impacts on businesses and property owners. And so we've been working with them for several months now, kind of on the background, but really the goal is to develop a concept for a really multimodal street that serves all of the users and creates that postcard street that we want for Higgins, creating a gateway into downtown and thinking a little bit differently about what its function is. So our process as we go through this, the first is stakeholder engagement, which we have started and will continue throughout the project. Over the last couple of weeks, Ben and I and the project team have been engaging with property owners, residents. We've done a couple of events that we've gone out to, and really the idea is to get as much engagement as possible throughout this project so that we have a design that really has the support of the community and all of the stakeholders. We've also started with the background and traffic analysis, and we'll be moving into the alternatives development over the next couple of weeks. And then with the goal of having a final adopted concept by February or March of next year. So moving pretty quickly through this to put us in a good position for federal funding or other potential ways to get the project done. We've got some objectives for this, as I mentioned. One is to make sure that we engage in the business owners and residents along the corridor, so we really understand the needs and we can develop a design that meets those. And then developing a concept that really improves safety as our highest priority, considers all of the different users, making it a truly multimodal street, and really providing a space that is a destination as Higgins sort of wants to function and is developing in that direction, that it is not a highway through corridor. It is, or parts of it are a highway, but it is a destination as well. And we need to think about it in that way, that it's functioning and has a lot of different competing needs. So then our outcomes, we really want it, again, we want it to be safer for all modes. We want the streetscape to be inviting. We want it to be a place people want to go and to be and to travel along. We want to support the economic activity and the growth along the corridor that's coming out of the downtown master plan and that we're seeing in places like the Missoulian lot that's currently proposing redevelopment, all of that growth, and then really create a street that is the core of Missoula and really is that destination and highlights. So as I mentioned, we started some public outreach already. We have a website that we'll be using throughout this project on engagemissoula.com. and we have through that a lot of ways to engage people interactively. We have a map that people can put input through. We have a survey. We have idea and question boards where people can throw out just whatever kinds of ideas or concepts they might want to. And then we're doing direct outreach. So we had stakeholder meetings. We have our steering committee, which some of you are on. And then we went out to events. We engaged, I think, close to or over 200 people between out to lunch, downtown tonight, and the Saturday market. And I was surprised at how much people were wanting to engage with us without having to sort of haul them over to our table. Like, people were coming up. We had groups of people really engaged around this project. And so I think that's going to be pretty exciting. And so we're learning a lot about this project already, and we'll continue to give updates as we have them. But for now, that's kind of where we're at. I intended to talk a little bit more about some of the initial engagement things that we're hearing, but really just in a quick summary, that parking is coming up as something that's really important in different ways in different places. The left turn movements particularly on the hip strip, but also on the north side of the bridge are coming up a lot, just in terms of people's travel patterns and where they want to go, and potential conflicts. And then safety, whether it's people biking, the conflicts you get as you transition from the bridge and the protected bike lane into traffic is a real issue, and we saw it firsthand watching it. And then even pedestrian safety of people trying to cross those left turn prohibitions, people don't follow them, and you get these sort of unanticipated left turns, conflicts with pedestrians crossing, and people just generally feeling like that's not particularly safe. And then a lot from the businesses thinking about, Higgins as a destination, and not necessarily just wanting to see people drive through as fast as possible, but that they are coming to Higgins as a destination and wanting to really promote that, whatever mode people are traveling. And then finally on transit, that this corridor could be really key for transit in the future, and we need to figure out if that's the case, and then how we accommodate it. And people are really excited to think about 15-minute transit service along Higgins and into downtown. So that's where we're at. We'll be developing some alternatives over, like I said, over the next couple of months. We'll hopefully be bringing those back in October. But in the meantime, if anyone on this committee is interested, or if you want to participate, definitely going through Engage Missoula is a good way to get sort of basic information and participate. So sorry I kept us a little bit over, but that's the quick version of that presentation. If there are any last thoughts, but I don't want to keep anyone longer than we need to. So with that, I'll wrap up that presentation.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Any questions or comments from the committee? Good. Okay, seeing none, we have no items of old business. Any announcements or closing comments?
I do have one quick announcement that, as I alluded to earlier, we are doing our final sort of wrap-up forum for the Reserve Street Community Input Project next Wednesday evening. I could send out links. I probably should have included that in the agenda, but I can send that out. Or if you're interested, get in touch. We're doing it virtually, just for sort of ease of access. But we'll be presenting our results from that study, the final report, and sort of having the community conversation about it to try to wrap that project up. And then we'll bring the presentation and the report back to you, this committee and TPCC likely next month or in October, depending on schedules. So
Thanks, Aaron. Okay. Well, appreciate your time today, everyone. If there's nothing else, we will be adjourned.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.